Okay, so we are prepping to do the waistband for the front fly. Okay, so what I would prefer you to do is have one sample for the actual front fly, okay, and then another sample for the actual waistband for the front fly. Okay, so so two samples. So the second one that we're going to do for the waistband, you can do the whole zipper, install over again. It's probably great practice. But if low on supplies or just don't want to do it that way, I'm going to show you how I do it, pretending like a zipper was already installed. Okay, and so this is, remember I was telling you about the curve for pants. Okay, so this is the pants version where after the dot it curves into the inseam instead of going from the dot straight down for a skirt. So that's the only difference. The install of the zipper, fly front zipper, is exactly the same. So for pants, your base all the way down to here, backspace, do a permanent stitch from here to here. And usually with pants, because we use them so much sitting down, up and down, I usually reinforce from the dot to the inseam again, meaning reinforcing is taking it at a smaller stitch length. So usually it's 2.5. You can do a 2 or 1.5 stitch length and going over your already permanent stitch, and that just seems to, because it's a lot of wear and tear in that area. So like I said, that's the only difference. So make up another sample. And this is the front. This was just telling me that from that dot is just straight down. Okay. So make up another sample, and I started before I started recording. So I'm pretty much into finish the sample before the waistband, but I wanted to show you. So, okay, so this is, let's go here first. So we have to kind of pretend that this is the pants version, okay, because I already kind of sewed up the pants. So let's start here. So what I want you to do when we're making up the sample to do the waistband, do your basting till you get to the dot. Then I want you to change to a permanent stitch and stitch from the dot to the inseam. And then I want you to reinforce it going back to the dot at the lower stitch length. So like I said, a 2.0 or 1.5, and restitching over from the dot to the inseam, that curve here, okay? And then what I want you to do is open up your pants so that it's laying wrong side up. Okay, so this was one side of the fly, this is the other side of the fly. Okay, now what I want you to do is turn in, so like you're pretending like you installed the zipper. So you need to turn in, it's hard to tell you. Okay, so we're gonna pretend we do it like this. So from here, we're gonna pretend that this is the way this will look, right? So basically it would have been together like that. Been together like that, right? Okay, so it would have been together like that. And you would have sewn from here going down to the inseam, and then you would have opened it, and it would have looked like that, just with those two together like that, right? And then what we do, remember, is press it open, right? So you're going to press it open, and then you're going to clip a seam allowance so it'll lay flat. Now, from here, so it should be pressed open like this, right? So what I want you to do is just fold under that flap. So fold it under until that stitch line, that base stitch line. So basically just tuck it under like that. And then you're going to take it to your sewing machine and sew it closed. Okay? And so that is what this is. Okay? It was tucked under and sewn closed. Okay? So it looked like that. So hard to think. And so I tucked it under and sewed it. Okay? From that point on, remember, it's like your zipper wants to naturally go to this side, remember, flat. And what you're going to do, remember, all this is still basted, okay? It's not open. So what you're going to do is, remember, we outline, and use brown, I don't know if you can see it, but it's right here. Outline the fly on the left hand side. So outlined it, so it'll come on this side. So that's what that is. So turn it over, and you know, just pretend that's where your zipper tape is, and kind of want your stitch line to go kind of in the middle, and it's usually 1/4 to 1/2 inch in, but just kind of, you want your stitch line to be in the middle of your zipper tape. Most definitely don't go so over your teeth. And then from that point, when you find that middle point, you can take your template there and then outline it. You can do it that way. And then you're going to sew it. Okay, remember that comes off washable, and then you're going to sew that. So then that just pretends like you secured the zipper to here. Now you're open up your basting stitches, and that's where we are at this point. Okay, and like I said, if it makes it easier, just go ahead and do another fly front install. It's great practice anyway, right? So just go ahead and do that if this method is kind of confusing to you. And so now with the waistband is very, very, very simple. All it is you just have to have whatever your seam allowance, and mine is usually 1/2 inch extended past your flies, your fly flaps is like what I like to call them. They have to extend 1/2 inch, or whatever your seam allowance, past the underlap one and the overlap one. Okay, from here to here, and then put in your seam allowance. Mine is 1/2 inch, and then you got to measure from here to here and put in your seam allowance there. So again, measure from one side, and then this is just the front. You got to remember you have a back waistband as well, so you got to measure that. But measure from your side seam to your, basically your underlap, then add your 1/2 inch or whatever your seam allowance is. Then you can go from here, from your side seam to your overlap, add your side seam, your seam allowance, and then remember to do the back as well. And remember, you know, we don't have seam allowances on our samples, but remember, on your actual garments there is seam allowance on the side seams as well, so you got to add that into your calculation as well.
You can add the seam allowance to the side seams if you're having a seam there. If it's a one piece waistband, you
that
won't
length,
have seam
was,
allowance there.
and that both ends, you know, that will be center front instead of center back, because the opening here is in the front, so it'll be center front on both ends. And I'm going to do this for you, but I'm just explaining it. And then whatever the width you like it to be, and you know, we typically do 1.25 inches or 1.5 inches, you know, just for practice purposes. And so you just make that up. So I'll take these measurements and I'll draw a rectangle with the width at 1.25 inches, and whatever that length is, you know, plus the seam allowances for the underlap and the overlap. And then what you're going to do is cut 2 of those. Remember to add seam allowances to the top and the bottom, because we don't have the back portions. There's no side seams, so you don't have to add seam allowance there because it's just a sample. So, but add it to the top and the bottom, because those basically are joining allowances. We need it to join here, and we need it to join when we do the waistband facing. So make up 2 and add seam allowances to the top and to the bottom. Okay. Okay, so because we don't have the back, you don't need the full round. So we're just going to take your measurements from here to here and add the 1/2 inch. So from here to here, for me, for the underlap is 15.5 centimeters plus 1.3, gives me a total of 16.8. And that's what this is. And you're going to put it where it is right sides facing together, and you see, just line up the top, and you see there will be a overlap or an extension beyond the flap, the fly flap. It's hard to say, fly flap of that 1/2 inch. Okay, and then once we have that, going to press that up, and so now your waistband will look like that. And then we're going to add the facing. So it's going to be, so that's the right side facing up. It's going to be right side to right side, attaching the top of the facing and here, and you're going to stitch along the top line there. And remember, the bottom of your facing, depending on how you want to do it, I just normally always just serge mine. But remember, if you can pink it or you can turn it under. It's hard to see with this fabric, but turn it under for a more traditional waistband look. Okay, so the first step is right sides together. And so that, and you just repeat the step for your overlap. Okay, just repeat the step for your overlap. So that will be here. So once you do that, come back. So you see there's extending the flap there by the 1/2 inch. Come back. So remember, you're going to stitch the waistband to the garment, right sides facing, flip up, everything is away, including the seam allowance that you make once you stitch that line, so everything is facing away from the garment. Then you're going to attach the waistband facing to the top edge of your waistband and finish the bottom of it however you want to do it, and at that point come back. Okay, so at this point you should be here. You would have, let's start from the beginning. You can do one side. Let's just do one side. So attach your waistband to the garment, right sides facing, flip that up, so that's that part. So that's at that stage, and then you're going to attach the waistband facing to the waistband, right sides together. So that's this part, and so you should have and where your waistband is extending beyond your fly flaps by a half an inch on both sides there, half an inch. Now I want to point to you at this point, if you want, you could also extend one your overlap this side on your waistband by more than your half an inch. You can make this, because at this point, once we finish our sewing, it's going to look like that. It's going to be even with the flap on both sides, right? It's going to be even with the flap on both sides, which in itself creates, it's going to look like that once I flip it under. In itself, because of the way the fly front is, creates an overlap. But if you want your waistband to extend even farther, because you know some of your waistbands extend here and may have another button here, that basically is just a design feature. Okay, so right now we have both waistband pieces extending a half an inch. So one, if you want that to have more of an extension, so one side, your underlap, will be half an inch, and then you can do your overlap a full inch or inch and a half, you know. So that's just a design feature. And the way you would finish it off is, so here for the underlap, so for both of them, for these, what you're going to do is, so it's basically going to be in line with the underlap, okay, or whatever flap it is, it's going to be in line there. But typically it's going to be your seam allowance, okay, and mine is a half an inch. So you're going to sew straight down, and then you're going to clip the excess off. So sew straight down so it's in line with the flap, and then cut the excess off. But say you have more of an extension on this side, all you're going to do is, and let's say this is more of the, this lays better, so let's just say what you're going to do is, and remember I still have to flip this over, but I'm just showing you how you would sew. So you would sew an L, technically it'll be on this side. So what you would do is, stay down, you're going to sew down, and then you're going to sew over to your flap using whatever seam allowance you have. So mind you, this will be a longer extension, and you would have your seam allowance going at the top, seam allowance going down the side, seam allowance at the bottom. So what you're going to do is just at this step here, what we're about to do, if you have more of an extension, you would just sew down and then across up to your flap here. All right, and then you would just trim the excess that you have. But what we're going to do for this one is just sew just straight down in line with the flap on both sides. So just straight down, align with the flap, and then we're going to cut off the excess. And then what we're going to do is just turn it right side out. So the same thing, if you had the more of extension, once you sew that L and clip, you're just going to turn it inside out. Okay, so you just stick your fingers in, turn it inside out for both ones. So go ahead and sew straight down in line with the flap, and cut off the excess, and I'll meet you back here. All right, at this point, your fly waistband should look like this. We done stitched down in line with the fly flaps. All right, and now we're just going to cut off the excess. Try to cut it to about 1/4 of an inch. That's one. All right, and now all we're going to do is turn them inside out, okay, and thus flipping the waistband facing to the inside of the garment. Okay, so you just stick your finger in and turn it. All right, so we're just going to give that a good press. Like I said, save time, I don't press. But here, you see, gives you that. It gives you that overlap, and it is in line with your flap here, flap edges. Remember, you can also have this extend even further along, have a button. You know, it's just a style feature. Just remember to make your L shape. Instead of straight down, it's straight down and then over to the flap. And that is your waistband. Now, keep in mind, I didn't say it. Okay, so now that you turned it to the inside, you want to understitch your facing. You're facing to the seam allowance. All right, so you understitch that, and then you can either slip stitch your facing to your garment, or my favorite, stitch in the ditch. Sorry, if you want to say slip, stitch in the ditch. Stitch in the ditch there, along where the seam line where the waistband meets the garment itself. So you're just stitching in between there. Now everybody knows what stitching the ditch is. I did a tutorial. I'm not sure I did a tutorial, but I explained it, so you should know. And what that is it just catches the inside of your facing on the inside. Okay, and that is it. So that covers your fly waistband, whether it's just the seam allowance itself or if it has the extension. Okay, so I won't do another tutorial on extension because it's the same exact thing. Explain to you what it was. So just say that's the extension portion. So what you did was, you know, you just went down and you sewed over to the flap there. Any questions on any of that, let me know. Now keep in mind, please make sure to press your garments. And to save time, I just don't do it on camera. There you go. Happy sewing.